You want to play baseball. You don't want to wait around. Let's get the ball, let's go and keep the game moving. And it feels a little bit like the game that you grew up watching or grew up playing with your buddies, right? The best version of the game we can put on the field is going to kind of benefit baseball everywhere. The goal isn't to get back to, 1987 baseball, but there were things about that 1987 baseball that was good and that fans say they want more of even now.
That's Joe Martinez, a former Major League pitcher who's now helping shape the future of the game as the VP of on-field strategy at Major League Baseball.
Now pitching, number 49, Joe Martinez.
Joe spent years on the mound with the Giants, Pirates, Diamondbacks, and Indians, now Guardians. Over his 9 years in pro ball, he racked up more than 1,500 innings and 1,200 strikeouts. Now he brings his experience as a player into the decisions that are propelling the sport forward. In this episode, Joe sits down with Aman Loomba, SVP of Product at GameChanger, and Alex Trezza, Senior Manager of Baseball. Alex is also a former player, coach, and recruiter. Together, they break down the latest tech shaping Major League Baseball, from PitchCom, designed to eliminate sign stealing, to the pitch clock, aimed at speeding up the game and bringing fans back to the action. This is Athletic Intelligence from GameChanger, a show where we go deep inside the world of baseball and softball, uncovering the tech that's shaping the game. Aman kicks off today's conversation.
You're the VP of on-field strategy at MLB. It sounds like you play a role in rolling some of this stuff out. What are the boundaries of your job?
I like to say, when everybody watches baseball games with their family or their buddies and you're just sitting around the couch watching the game, you're like, what will make the game better? Or, what really bothers me about the game when guys do this or there's too much of that? We kind of do the same thing, except we actually then are able to try to design rule changes or technologies, right, that actually address those issues or get at those things we want to see more of. So any kind of on-field changes that you've seen in the last couple of years, our team has kind of been involved in those, both in trying to dream them up, right? Some of the ideas kind of aren't our own. We didn't just make all of it up. We source them from kind of anywhere. They can come from fans, prior rule changes that maybe didn't work quite as well. Some of them are new also. Then how do we design what those changes are? How do we test them and get feedback and kind of refine them to the point where they are viable options at the major league level? Right now, obviously, have to make the decision if that's the right choice for the game itself. So,
what's sort of like the main outcome you're trying to drive? Is it more engagement from people watching, more engagement from people in the stands? Like, what are you looking to accomplish?
If you give the consumers more of what they want or a better product for them to watch, to make them want to go to the ballpark, to make them want to turn their TV on, to make them want to get out there and play themselves, right, and get involved. The best version of the game we can put on the field is going to kind of benefit baseball everywhere. So that's really our goal, is to try to figure out, what is the best version of the game, and how can we, give fans more of what they want and less of what they don't. And I think the players would also agree, right? We want to give the players what they want also, right? What's fun to play? What helps them showcase how good they are, how athletic they are, how special these guys are. We have an extreme example, right, with Shohei Ohtani right now. The guy's one of the best pitchers in our game and one of the best hitters in our game. But all that stuff is really difficult. He makes it look easy, but it's really hard. But, how can we kind of showcase players like that and give our fans more of that? Because that's what they like to watch.
Shohei Ohtani is one of the most remarkable players in modern baseball, an ace pitcher and a power hitter all in one, with 2 American League MVP awards and a National League MVP honor to his name so far.
Did your experience as a player influence the way you think about implementing some of these on-field technologies?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's probably the value that I bring more than anything to our team is when we are contemplating these changes or new technology that we're using, it's easier, I think, for me to kind of get in that place and think about how would I play, how would I pitch with this rule in place, right? What would I do? What would I be worried about? Where do I think this would break down? Even in some cases, how can players exploit these rules and find soft spots that make them ineffective a lot of times? Because, as a player, you're looking for any advantage you can. And if you can do something that's going to give you more time, for instance, when we're trying to make them move at a certain pace, like that's probably not a good thing. From our perspective, we want to then be able to plan for how do we make these rules? How do we construct them in a way that they are effective and they don't have those big loopholes in them, right? And they don't negatively affect guys' ability to execute pitches or to hit or field or whatever it might be.
At first glance, it looks like a pitcher adjusting their cap or a catcher tapping their wrist, but what they're doing is sending a signal. That's PitchCom, a wireless communication system that lets catchers call pitches silently. They tap a keypad on their wrist, and the pitch type plays directly into the pitcher's earpiece tucked inside their cap.
Strike one.
It's a modern solution to an age-old problem, sign stealing. In the past, catchers used signs to call pitches, but if a runner on second base or a coach or even someone off the field could decode these signals, they could tip off the batter. It's happened at every level of the game, but in recent years, sign stealing has become a bigger concern, especially at the collegiate level. Alex jumps in to dig deeper into what prompted the league to act.
How much was there about potential sign stealing and things that teams were worried about that drove the league and yourself, right, to really look into PitchCom? Obviously, it was happening at the collegiate level with wristbands and earpieces and stuff like that, probably a little bit before that. But how much did that influence, how quickly you guys moved?
I think a benefit of it is obviously like kind of the sign stealing, addressing potential sign stealing issues. I think it's also kind of a pace of game thing where major league teams had these very elaborate systems in place to try to prevent sign stealing, right? You'd see, the pitchers had the cards in their hats, the catchers had the cards, they'd be holding up numbers to each other, or they'd have mound visits, every time someone got on second base. So it just really dragged the game down, right? And when a runner got on second and things really slowed down. So by using PitchCom, it became a lot easier because you didn't have to do those things anymore. It's secure, you're pressing a button, only the pitcher and catcher, whoever else has the receivers in their hats can hear the pitch call. So, I think it was very useful, both for pace of game and also kind of the sign stealing concerns. We tested the minor leagues like we do with everything else pretty much before it gets to the big leagues. The players really liked it. There was some good feedback. And then we actually tested during Major League spring training one year. And there was a call from the teams that they wanted to use it that year, right? We weren't necessarily planning on doing it that way, but we were prepared and they were the ones who were really kind of calling for it. It was more of a pull than it was a push. But it does definitely address, that issue as well.
Another major change you've maybe seen in pro and college ball is the pitch clock. It's a visible countdown on the field that gives pitchers a set amount of time to throw the ball and batters a set amount of time to get ready in order to speed up the pace of play. Major League Baseball began by testing the clock in the minors and eventually implemented it in the big leagues. The results speak for themselves. In 2023, the average length of a 9-inning game was 2 hours and 36 minutes, the quickest pace since 1984. But it's not just quicker games we're seeing. The pitch clock has helped bring more action back into baseball. In fact, fans saw more stolen bases than in any season over the past 40 years. And naturally, with any major change, new questions start to surface, including whether a faster pace or less recovery time between pitches could lead to more injuries.
Has there been any talk? I know I read a couple articles about it. I follow it closely as a former pitching coach, and just time between pitches. Are people worried about kind of the load on the arm and the stress as opposed to, taking 30, 40 seconds between each pitch?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we've heard some of that. We've also looked into it. The office did a pretty comprehensive study on pitcher health and arm injuries and, relation to all causes, not just rest, but also intensity and velocity and all those types of things. Nothing that we've seen or anything the doctors have told us shows kind of a correlation between the implementation of the pitch clock and an increase in injuries. We always want to be mindful of those things. But I think the intent really with the pitch clock was to get us back to a pace and kind of a rhythm of the game that we saw in like the 90s and the 80s when baseball was extremely popular, right? There wasn't so much sitting around, fixing your batting gloves, looking at your positioning card. Guys kind of got on the mound, threw a pitch, and batters got right back in the box and got ready for the next one. So that's what we were trying to do and return to that time. And that was a time when we had very few arm injuries, right? So it was a different thing. And obviously, like, we wouldn't want to do anything with any kind of change that is going to put players at, increased risk for injury. That's obviously, a kind of a foundational piece of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I have to say that pace of play is awesome, right? Get the ball back and get ready and go, right? Like that's how the game's made to be played. So it's been fun to see how both of those things have really increased the pace over the last couple of years. So it's been fun to watch as a
Yeah, I mean,
baseball
from playing
purist.
too, right? Yeah, you get the ball, you play, right? You want to play baseball. Let's get the ball, let's go and keep the game moving. And it feels a little bit like, even though it's, through new changes, it almost feels like in the game that you grew up watching a little more, or grew up playing with your buddies, right?
Is that a common way for y'all to talk about some of the changes that you propose for on field? Is getting back to a time when baseball felt a certain way, a time when baseball had a certain level of popularity and significance? Is that a common framing?
I think so. And I think it resonates with some fans also who kind of yearn for those same things. I mean, the shift restriction is a good example that we had a lot of fans, particularly those who are probably like my age and older, that we're used to shortstop playing shortstop and third baseman playing near the line, and someone out in short right field was like an atrocity, right? They hated that, not because of what it did to the game; it just looked bad. It was uncomfortable. So they wanted the game to look like it used to look. When we go to our fans and we ask them what they want, and we do a lot of polling and surveys and things like that, we try to use their feedback as guidelines for what we're working towards with these changes, right? And a lot of it is about getting the game a better pace of play, getting the ball in play, watching guys do exciting things, stealing bases, taking extra bases, making great plays in the field. Very rarely do you see, well, we want to see more mound visits and walks. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like when you ask the fans, we really try to let them lead us to what the answer is. The goal isn't to get back to, 1987 baseball, but there were things about that 1987 baseball that was good and that fans say they want more of even now.
Not all of the changes the MLB has made to the game are as obvious as the pitch clock. Some are a little more subtle. In 2023, the MLB increased the size of its bases, a move that some fans may not have noticed.
We've asked people this before. Do you know how big a base was before we went to a bigger base? Do you know what the size of it was?
No.
I don't know. I know home plate, but I don't know the base.
Right. So no, I didn't know either. Right. That's kind of the point. Right. And so bases used to be 15 inches on each side. And now we went to an 18-inch base on each side. So it's a little bit bigger. It's not super noticeable. I mean, when you're playing, you on the field, you're like, oh, that looks big, kind of, but you kind of very quickly just don't think about it anymore. It has potentially contributed to a little bit more aggressive base running, right? Base stealing, things like that, because they are a touch closer to each other. We also think that it's probably helped reduce some injuries around the bases, right? Players are just bigger now than they've ever been. They're faster, right? So just creating a little bit more room to maneuver around the bag, a little more space for guys to run through first base, we think has had a positive effect. So it's something like that, which is pretty subtle. I don't think, if you dropped a fan from 1960 who hadn't seen a baseball game till, 2025, you dropped them off at a ball game, you'd never point out the bases being bigger. But, it has had some kind of an impact.
I didn't realize that it had an impact on a potential impact on the injury rate. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, we hope so. I think it's probably worth, continuing to study over time, right? The more data you get, I think the more you're confident in your conclusions, but it does seem to be helping.
I'm curious, Joe, how much were you an analytics guy? Were you looking for tech when you were playing to help you, or were you a guy who just went out and relied on the things you knew in baseball? Again, it was different when we played, and did you think you would ever be doing the stuff you are doing now, right? To implement, some sort of tech into the highest level of the game?
No, I was not an analytics or tech guy. Different time though, like you said, we had a lot less tools at our disposal. By the time I was getting out of baseball, I think Rapsodo and PitchFX and all that stuff was really starting to be on the rise. And obviously we're way past that now. But even with the Giants I came up with in the minor leagues, it was a little bit more of like an old school approach with Brian Sabian as general manager, who was obviously great general manager, and took the team to 3 World Series titles. But they had a different way of going about developing players. And a lot of it was based on mental approach and commitment and execution and getting people out, focusing a little bit more, maybe not on the outcomes per se, but like they stress different things rather than, I think, the things they do now, right? We have the benefit of looking at these huge data sets and figure out exactly what kind of behaviors lead to success most of the time, or the highest percentage of time. I think now it's great when you can use this data to kind of help you learn things about yourself that maybe you couldn't feel or you weren't aware of, or kind of reinforce things. If you are making changes, is this actually better or is it not? And how do we measure those things? I also wasn't a big rules guy. I don't think I'd ever opened a baseball rule book, right? The umpire was there for a reason. But now that we have it, you need to use it in a responsible way. Hopefully it doesn't do anything but kind of enhance the good things about the game that are already present, right? And you don't want it to take away from them. So I think the introduction of analytics and technology is great, but I do think you don't want it to take away from kind of some of the wonderful things about the game that existed well before there were any kind of TrackMan devices or anything like that.
How about you, Trez? Were you an analytics guy?
No, I look at all this stuff now and I would not like to look at it. Like certain things like Joe mentioned, right? Like that would help you. But I think I would have gone down a wormhole, so to speak. Even coaching at BC, we had guys, I'm like, you're not allowed to look at this stuff. Just go out there and play. So I think what's interesting now is there has to be a balance. Some players, again, don't want to look at any of it. And some players want to know as soon as they come in a dugout, right? What pitch was that? What was the count? Like, what's the velo? So it's a quirky sport in that sense. There's a lot of different attitudes towards that stuff. But I think at the end of the day, there's something there that can help you develop and get better and be successful. So you got to try to pull that out, without going too far where it's going to impact you negatively.
With all this new data and tech, it can be challenging to find balance. For some players, the numbers help. For others, they get in the way. How do coaches, managers, parents, and trainers use it without letting it take over? And in a game that's constantly evolving, there's always another innovation just around the corner.
One cool thing that I don't know if you all have seen is, and this I wouldn't say is as impactful yet, but is the Treject pitching machine. Have you seen this?
I actually just saw an Instagram post about it yesterday. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so it's a company, I believe out of Canada, and they're working with a number of big league teams. They have a pitching machine that has kind of a video of a pitcher pitching, and it can be, a specific major league pitcher, and it replicates obviously what they look like by the video, also their release point and release height and all that, and the characteristics of their pitches, right? Spin, speed, all movement, all that stuff. So it's a way for players to kind of get quote unquote live at bats without actually having to face a live pitcher. So it's pretty cool technology.
Wow. Okay. So you've created robotic versions of real life pitchers that you can now practice against.
Well, I haven't created any of that, but someone has.
This company has. Someone has cloned them into the technology, and we can now play against them. That's fascinating.
It's cool. It's really cool.
There were some companies, even when we were playing, that were touching on that, and there was like first versions of it were very weird, where like you're double toe tapping and it's not coming out at the same time, so they weren't used. But it seems like the tech now is really good. I mean, you're getting multiple bats before you even face anyone. Do you think that's going to influence player success? Obviously, they're doing it for that, but how close is that going to be related to a guy being able to know a pitcher's going to throw a 3-2 slider and be able to, hit a ball in the gap or something like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure, like tendencies wise, if it's all that helpful. Maybe you could program it in some way to do that. But the hope is that it leads to guys putting the ball in play more. Right? I think one of the problems that we definitely have in Major League Baseball right now is the strikeout rate is quite high. Just for reference, and I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but we're somewhere in that neighborhood of like 23% strikeout rate, which is similar to the rate Roger Clemens struck out batters for his entire career. So the average major league pitcher right now is striking people out like Roger Clemens did, which is pretty wild, right? It's kind of an alarming stat.
Clemens pitched from 1984 to 2007 and racked up 4,672 strikeouts, the third most in MLB history, with a 3.12 career ERA. So the average pitcher striking out hitters at the same rate as Clemens is a sign the game has changed.
So I think the more we can get the ball in play, the more we can involve more of the players, see those great diving plays and double plays and running catches in the gaps and all that stuff. We want, more and more of that is always good and makes a more entertaining game. So if by the use of these pitching machines, these advanced pitching machines, guys can take away a little bit of that first time seeing a pitcher effect and help them adjust to kind of movement profiles and velocity and things like that, maybe get the ball and play a little bit more. That would be great to see. Well, whether or not that's going to happen, I'm not sure yet. I think it's a little too early before we can make a conclusion on that or draw a conclusion on that.
That's great.
How do pitchers feel about that? Do they want fewer strikeouts in the game?
I'm sure they don't. You can ask the pitchers in the 60s, right, when they lowered the mound too. There's things that baseball has done in the past to try to kind of keep this equilibrium between pitchers and hitters in kind of an acceptable range that makes the game fun. Of course, like if you didn't have to take action, that'd be best, right? If kind of the invisible hand of the game kind of steered us back to that equilibrium point, that'd be great. But what we've seen over the last 20 years or even more is just kind of this strikeout rate that continues to climb.
Sounds like there's a fine balance among all your different sort of stakeholders here, the fans, pitchers, the batters, the umpires, the owners. What were some of the biggest hurdles you would face in trying to like deploy these technologies out onto the field?
I think the technology part has been, the only thing we've really done in the major leagues, I think, is PitchCom, right? I don't know if you would call the pitch clock a technology. I know it's technically a clock, and I think the biggest hurdle with PitchCom, for instance, was just getting folks used to it and embracing the benefits that it provided. I know we had some pitchers who've been pitching for a long time that are great pitchers still who are reluctant to use it because they were used to doing it the other way, right? Oh no, me and my catcher, we have a system. I'm not going to use it. This is fine. But, giving them time, they kind of got used to it. They started to embrace it. And now I think everybody uses it pretty much for every pitch. But I think when we are convinced that something's going to be valuable and make the game better, that isn't going to change the game in a bad way or have a negative impact on the game, it's much easier to kind of introduce these things, these technologies to the players and then kind of let them take it from there. And they'll tell us ultimately whether or not it's worthwhile. And, we test a lot of things in the minor leagues before we ever get to the big leagues. But if they don't use something or if there's a lot of problems, we either have to adjust or we have to look for other solutions, right? So that part, it gets a little bit easier. But sometimes there are some hurdles in terms of like just changing the status quo.
Mm-hmm. Just getting people to adopt something new that they just haven't done before.
That's awesome. We know that you're still dabbling in coaching a little bit. We know with the little ones, we know you use GameChanger. I'm actually looking at one of the teams here, 9U Shamrocks Green on GameChanger.
Yep.
And it looks like you got a big game coming up on March 30th versus the Hanover Hammers. Are you using any tech to get ready for that and manage some game plans? Or how does that influence, your use of kind of tech even in the youth game with fan experience and tech in baseball?
Kind of at that level, right? Our biggest thing is communication and keeping everybody on the same page. I mean, we do it in the workplace, but it's just as challenging to keep all the parents informed to make sure, they know where the boys need to be and when, what we're planning to do, both with practices and games and help them stay up to date on what's going on. So it's been, extremely helpful for us. I was actually just using it before we got on this call because I was, planning some practices for later this week as we prepare for our game on Sunday, like you were talking about. We use it across a bunch of different teams too. We even, I don't coach our rec team that my same son is on, but his coach does. So it's easy. It's a super easy kind of way to keep everything in one place, keep us organized as a family and then also like communicate out to the other players' parents, which is great.
How have you seen young players and their relationship with professional baseball impact their relationship with playing baseball as a youth athlete? Are they linked together? Are you more likely to want to watch your, local pro team if you're also picking up the bat for your local little league?
I think so. I don't think they're, they have to go together all the time. I know my oldest son, who's 11 now, he just told us this year he doesn't want to play baseball anymore, which, it breaks my heart a little bit. But he's interested in other things, which is great. He's got other things that take up his time. But he still loves watching games. He still likes sitting on the couch with the rest of us and, watching the Yankees or Mets or Giants or whoever play. But I do think it is helpful, right? If you see Aaron Judge out there hitting home runs, you want to get on the field and try to do it, yourself. And, I think the opposite way works as well. If you're out there and you see how much fun it is and you make a great play and then, you see Anthony Volpe make a great play, it just kind of like helps kind of reinforce that loop that I think gets people to a place where they now work for the league office at 42 years old, or coaching at Boston College.
I'm really interested in thinking about the ways in which those things will filter down to the youth level, because as bad as an injury is to a pro, an injury to your kid is a lot worse, right? And completely could change the course of your life in so many different ways. that, for example, at GameChanger, like, I don't know, your kids might be a little too young to use this yet, but, just pitch counting and being able to get pitch counts out to state associations and monitor according to the rules and days of rest and all that. Where I was looking for opportunities to try to make the game safer too, because I think that's a really, really big concern among parents.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the pitch smart guidelines and things like that are very helpful, and I think being able to track that stuff is useful, and particularly across different leagues, right? Like one of the problems I'm sure with some of the youth baseball players is they throw 50 pitches for team A and then they go play with their other team the next day. And coach says, can you pitch? And, you're a 10-year-old kid and you just can't wait to get out there. Sure, I can pitch, but if you're able to kind of track usage, that kid's pitches thrown over the course of or across different teams, it's going to help everybody just make sure that he or she stays healthy, right? And I think that stuff is really helpful and super important. We want players to stay healthy all the time, but you're right. An injury to a younger player is way worse than an injury to an older player.
Looking ahead out into the future of the youth game, what kinds of technology shifts do you think are going to impact more at the youth level? Is it stuff that's going to trickle down from the pros? Is there some other way that you're thinking about technology and the way kids play?
If experience is anything, like stuff from pros trickles down, right? So you probably have a lot more radar guns at youth baseball games than you ever did. I don't think I ever saw radar guns until I was in high school. And it wasn't pointed at me, I don't think. You probably see more and more of that. I imagine you get the hit tracks and blast motion sensors and arm sleeves, right? So, I mean, hopefully it's stuff like that, right? More than anything. If you can try to keep kids healthier and monitor workload and all that, it's probably a better case. But maybe there's ways to even make practicing more fun, right? And more engaging. I know we have things like golf simulators, right? Which allow you to play golf in a garage when it's 30 degrees outside rather than trying to get on a golf course. Maybe there's ways to use that for baseball. Maybe these traject pitching machines, there's some kind of offshoot of that makes, practicing a little bit easier. So we'll see what happens, but hopefully it's just done in a way and kind of keeping the right things, as priorities rather than just trying to kind of maximize ability, which sometimes I think we can kind of get, towards, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe there's other ways outside of just performance and analytics to keep people engaged through technology. I think playing baseball as a kid competes with all the same things that you mentioned that spectating baseball competes with, right? Between video games and social media and all the other things kids could do with their time. When we survey youth coaches, and we do a lot of surveying as well, I feel like you manage a product as much as I do here. When we survey the youth coaches, we ask them, what do you need help with? What kinds of problems do you need to solve for your team? Like, how do you want to coach and develop your players? And one of the most common pieces of feedback is not, I need to help my players learn a particular drill, or I need to, get them to focus on some fundamental. It's just, I need to find ways to keep them engaged. I need to find ways to keep them really interested in coming back and showing up to practice and getting excited about the games, because without that, there's no point. So give me some technology that lets me keep them, excited about showing up to practice every day.
Yeah, I agree. Even stuff like the Dribble Up app and things like that, where like they have a basketball and it can keep track of like how many dribbles you do. My 9-year-old and his buddies were all doing that, and they're, competing. They go to school the next day, like I did 1,000 dribbles, or, it's true. Like, how do you keep guys interested and excited about it? Unfortunately with baseball too, like there's only certain positions that are like the most active. So, someone has to play outfield for an inning here or there. And that can be a challenge of keeping, especially like the youngest, players engaged. But, whatever we can do to do that and keep them coming back, right? And really developing that love for baseball, I think is important.
The changes happening in the major leagues help shape how we experience baseball at every level. As we heard today, what happens in the MLB eventually filters down through Little League dugouts, batting cages, and living rooms. Connection to the game doesn't always start on the field. It often begins in the stands, on the couch, in those moments spent watching. That's why how people experience the game matters. Innovations like PitchCom, automated strike zones, or a faster pace of play aren't just about modernizing baseball. They're about making it more exciting to play and more compelling to watch. They strengthen the connection people have with the sport on the field, in the dugout, or at home. And the more people connected to the game, for Major League Baseball, that's a win. This has been Athletic Intelligence from GameChanger. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow, rate, and share it. I hope you'll join us next time as we uncover the tech that's shaping the game.